first meeting of sociolinguistics. It's the introductions. So we try to see the key concepts first before we'll take a look about how we try to define about these introductions of sociolinguistics. It's we have to know the language. So what it means to know language first. In sociolinguistics, we try to deal about what we are, who we are, and where we are. So instead of understanding about what language is only, we try to know also how language is used by the society around us. So these language variations across speakers within speech of one person to another person somehow like is more important than just knowing about the knowledge of the language itself. So we try to know about the social constructions of identities to get things to be communicated, not to be miscommunicated. In terms of that, we have to know first about code and grammar. Code and grammar. Well, you can see there the definitions of when two or more people communicate with each other, we can call the systems they use as code. So when you use words, words here means code, because every single word that comes out from your mouth should be set as a code to the hearer about what, or to interlocutor about what he or she should be done based on the speaker's point of view or based on the speaker's utterance. So we should also note that speakers that are multilingual have the access of two or more codes. So it means that when you know more than one language, you always try to translate. When you have understood about what is talked about, what is being talked about, you can translate about anything that is said as the utterance comes out from the hearer or the speakers. And for one reason or another, shift back and forth between these languages in some form of multilingual discourse, are also using a linguistic system, but one which draws more than one language. So code and grammar is absolutely different here. Code here is just about words without knowing about the correct structure, but at least you find out about who's doing what. But in grammar, it's just talk about how the correct structures gives you more about meanings, about what you say, about the utterances. And then the systems itself, or the grammar there, something that each speaker knows. So when I say things, starting with the subject and then ends up with an object, starting with subject followed by the verb, I also understand that my hearer also uses the same system. That's grammar, right? So I have subject, after the subject, I have a verb. The hearer also uses the same systems as subject comes first before the verb and so on. So the knowledge here comprises and how we may best characterize that knowledge. So in terms of this, so I guess that in terms of sociolinguistics, we find out that the society is most important. The society's understanding is most important rather than just knowledge about the grammar itself. So that's why we try to define more about prescriptive and descriptive. But before that, we come to know about the in practice. Linguists do not find it all easy to write grammars because the knowledge that people have of languages they speak is extremely hard to describe. Anyone who knows a language knows much more about that language that is contained in any grammar book that attempts to describe the language. So in the prescriptive, it tends to be written and written work. They seek to outline the language and how it should be spoken. So prescriptive here, the term prescriptive here means that the understanding of the systems used by the people who use the language. So it's not just about the code itself, but the code that should be put into the correct grammar. In descriptive, we try to provide the language without really actually stuck in the systems of the prescriptive. So in this case, the descriptive, the sociolinguistics and linguistic anthropologists do in providing descriptive grammars of language which describe, analyze, and explain how people actually speak the languages. So it's just more than just the system inside the code, but the analyzing of how they speak the language. One example of the difference can be found in less and fewer distinctions. Prescriptively, less should be used with non-count nouns such as water, rice, money, for example, less money, less water, less rice. Fewer with count nouns. But something may be worth less money, but it costs fewer rupias, for example. So even though sometimes something like prescriptively, it cannot be accepted as fewer rupias because rupias is part of kinds of money, but in terms of sociolinguistics, it is accepted. So this is why in descriptive grammars, we try to describe, we try to analyze, we try to explain about more than just the stuck systems, the rigid systems in the prescriptive work. Or for examples, we also have many students. There's so many, so it can be counted, right? But less should be used for uncounted. Fewer should be used for counted. But less also can be used for uncounted. For example, chances you also hear when people saying things like, there were less students present today than yesterday. Of course, maybe some dialects of English, where distinctions is still commonly employed. There's some kinds of like films who also use this kinds of utterance. In terms of prescriptive and descriptive, after that, we come to understands about the competence and performance. Confronted with the tasks of trying to describe grammar or language, Chomsky distinguishes between what he has called as competence and performance. He claims that it is the linguist's task to characterize what the speakers know about the language. That is their competence, not what they do with their language. That is their performance. So we try to understand about the knowledge of the language. It is the competence. And what they do with the language means that the performance of the language after they get the knowledge of the language. In terms of that, we try to describe about why we have to understand the competence of the performance instead of understanding the performance without knowing what's inside the performance, inside the competence. Chomsky also tried to understand here that linguistic theory is concerned primarily with the ideal speaker-listener. Ideal speaker-listener means that I know what I'm talking about, and then you know, the hearer knows what I'm talking about, what the speaker is talking about. So it's about the homogeneous speech community. If I know what I'm talking about, but you don't know what I'm talking about, that's not homogeneous. So it's useless in speaking the utterances. So instead of that, the linguistic theory is what Chomsky said, that it is unaffected. So the languages used in society are unaffected by grammatically irrelevant conditions as memory limitations, and then distractions and errors in grammars, and applying his knowledge of language in actual performance. I don't care if I lose my understanding about the grammar, the correct grammar, sometimes like errors here, at least until you understand what I say. So let's say that as long as you know what I'm talking about, that's fine. That's what we are talking about here. And then the linguistic behavior of individuals cannot be understood without knowledge of the communities that they belong to. So if I know the correct grammar in my own knowledge, but my community do not know, the people there do not know about everything that I know, it's useless. So I think that I have to get used to the correct systems inside the society instead of individuals' knowledge. That's all for today. Thank you.